One of the most memorable parts of Megillas Esther and reading the Megillah is when we reach that stage in Perek Tes, the Aseres B'nei Haman, the Baal Kriya pauses, everyone rifles off this list of no names, names that we've never encountered before, Parmashta, Dalphon, Aspasa, Parasa, Adalia. We recite it B'neshima Achas. The Baal Kriya rereads it. We all try to strain our ears to listen to see if we can hear it as he's trying his hardest to recite it B'neshima Achas. Who cares? Who cares about the Aseres B'nei Haman? Additionally, a little bit later in Perek Tes, where Esther launches her request for another day of battle in Shushan for the Jews to vanquish their enemies, she also requests of Achashverosh, take the 10 children of Haman, take the 10 B'nei Haman and hang them on a tree. It just seems, and of course they are hung on the tree, it just seems so irrelevant, extraneous, and to be a little bit honest, a little bit abrasive. There's an Isser in Eretz Yisrael to hang anyone from a tree overnight. A Jewish person, Kikil Asa Elokim Talo in Parshas Kitetse, because every human body has the Tzelem Elokim. So there's no Isser to hang the children of Haman and Shushan, but it seems to run counter to the spirit of the Isser of not debasing or degrading a human body, not taking excess revenge. It just feels off. There's got to be some story behind the story. Here's the story behind the story of the Aseres B'nei Haman. Timnah became the Pilegesh of Eliphaz, Esav's daughter. So we have to go all the way back to Parshas Toldos. At some point, Esav's son Eliphaz takes Timnah as his Pilegesh. Timnah was spurned by Avraham. Another whole story. She becomes part of Esav's family, not Avraham's family, but becoming the Pilegesh of Eliphaz. And before she dies, she calls over Amalek, one of Eliphaz's children. And she tells Amalek, you're the one. You're the one who will have to recover the lost Bechorah. You're the one who will have to prevent the Jewish people from reaching that destiny and locking in the Bechorah. So make sure that whenever the Jewish people inch closer to their Bechorah, inch closer to their destiny, make sure you thwart them, make sure you halt them. So this becomes Amalek and his family, it becomes their mission, their historical task. So they pick and choose their moments very judiciously. It isn't an all-out onslaught on the Jewish people. So when the Jews leave Mitzrayim, Parshas B'Shalach, we're on our way. Matan Torah, we're on our way to Eretz Yisrael. So Amalek has to intervene. Vayavo Amalek vayilachem im Yisrael b'Refidim. When the Jewish people achieve dynasty in Shmuel Aleph, and Shaul is appointed. Now we have a king. We're getting closer to the Beis HaMikdash, closer to settling Eretz Yisrael. Agag, the grandson of Amalek, has to intervene. Haman is playing that same role. It's not just that he's insulted by Mordechai. He's crazy. He's overwhelmed with hatred and contempt, but to launch a genocide against an entire people because one person insults you, it's a little bit lopsided. Haman has a larger agenda, which this encounter with Mordechai incites. Years before the miracle of Purim, it's hard to know when, but it's written in the beginning of Sefer Ezra, and you have to read Ezra and you have to read Daniel to fully appreciate Megillas Esther. There's no way to fully understand all the elements of Megillah. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of cross-references. Koresh, a Persian king, had requisitioned, had authorized the Jewish people to return to Eretz Yisrael, to settle the land, to start building the Beis HaMikdash. It was halted. I'll talk about why it was halted later. That occurred a few years before Purim. It's hard to know when. A few years after Purim, it's hard to know when, 18 years after they returned to Eretz Yisrael, but after Purim, finally, Ezra and Nehemiah returned for the second wave, rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash with 42,000 Jews. Purim occurs right in the middle of those 18 years. They're back in Eretz Yisrael, they've started to build the land, it halts, Purim occurs, and then they return. Haman realizes the Jewish people are getting closer to being reselected into their second Beis HaMikdash. They're in Eretz Yisrael. So Haman has to intervene to try to prevent that, to fulfill his Amaleki mission. But it wasn't just Haman. If you look carefully at Ezra, Perek Daled, as I said before, read Ezra, read Nehemiah. In Ezra, Perek Daled, they're back in Eretz Yisrael. But what happens is the locals are a little opposed, non-Jews, they don't want the Jews there, they want to participate in the Beis HaMikdash, their request is denied, they get very angry, They start pestering them. Uve Malchus Achashverosh, this is Ezra Perek Daled Pasuk Vav. Betchilas Malchusa. So now Achashverosh is the ruler. It's hard to know whether this is our Achashverosh from Megillas Esther or just a generic Achashverosh. There is a medrash that says this is now our Achashverosh. That's Achashverosh of Megillas Esther. Kasvu Sitna al Yoshve Yehuda V'Yushalayim. People are writing letters back. Remember letters, how important letters are in Megillas Esther. Divrei Igeres Hazos. So there are haters of the Jewish people writing letters of hate back to Achashverosh, a Persian king, maybe our Achashverosh. Their names are very Persian. Who are these people writing letters? Rechum Be'el, Te'em, Shimshai, Safra. These are the people that are writing the letters. Perek Daled, Pasuk Ches. And these letters demand that the Persian king, maybe Achashverosh, halt the Beis HaMikdash. So the halting of the construction of the Beis HaMikdash was launched by people who were exposed to Jewish settlement and write letters back to a Persian king, possibly Achashverosh. Who are these letter writers in Israel a few years before the miracle of Purim? Well, Chazal say some of the letter writers were Bnei Haman. So it wasn't just Haman a few years later who was trying to commit genocide against the Jewish people. Beforehand, before Haman ever was promoted, he was just a mid-level apparatchik. Before Haman was ever appointed, his sons, maybe himself, but certainly his sons, lived in Israel or were politically engaged in the affairs of Israel and actively wrote letters preventing the Jews from settling the land of Israel, hateful, vengeful, contempting letters to possibly Achashverosh to halt the Beis HaMikdash. Then a few years after they write the letters and successfully halt the construction of the Mikdash and successfully start their Amaleki task, they end up in Shushan with their father. And Chazal want us to connect, Esther wants us to connect what happened in Israel a few years earlier before Purim to what happened in Shushan during the Nes of Purim. It's all one large attempt of Amalek, whether it's Bnei Haman or Haman, lahashmid, lahargo, le'abed es kol ha'Yehudim, to destroy all the Jewish people. Or to put it in modern terminology, a few years earlier, we don't oppose the Jews. We're just anti-settlement, anti-Zionists. We don't oppose the Jews, said Bnei Haman. Just don't let them live in land that isn't theirs and build a mikdash in land that isn't theirs. A couple of years later, the same people who were claiming we don't dislike Jews, we just dislike the Zionist settlers, turn out to be genocidal anti-Semites who want to murder every single Jew. So the Bnei Haman are not these innocent people who are just caught in the crossfire. They're the people who essentially launched the first step of the genocide and presumably are riling Haman up as he reports back to his wife Zeresh, and the whole plan to destroy all the Jews is hatched in Haman's home. Remember, it's in Haman's home that he hatches the plan. He sees Mordechai, he's angered by Mordechai, returns home, and Zeresh and perhaps Bnei Haman are there inciting him and riling him and planting these ideas into their mind because this is the fulfillment of their dreams. And of course, our responsibility to Amalek, which we struggle with as people, quite frankly, morally, but we are commanded, Macho Emcha Zecha Amalek, Hashem tells us, Mitachas Hashemayim Lo Tishkach, we're responsible to completely eliminate Amalek, and these are the Shushan representation or representatives of Amalek. So they have to be murdered, and they have to be killed, and not murdered, but liquidated. They have to be liquidated, and their bodies have to be hung because we have to demonstrate our continual victory over Amalek. This is part of the Amalek saga. It's not just taking 10 innocent people. They're not innocent. They were complicit in the entire process. They were complicit years before, and they are the Amalek of their generation with their father, Haman, who was also hung on a tree. So they're both on a tree because they're both part of this process. Haman was overtly genocidal. His sons, they camouflaged themselves as anti-Israel, but they were really anti-Semites. Purim Sameach.